Thank you very much for being here. We're kind of, we've got multimedia going on here. I think maybe it would be helpful if we went around and did introductions. Basically, you have the majority of the editorial board in this room, along with 2 reporters and an editor who are here in case you commit news. We're hoping you might, but you never know. So I'll start. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the editorial board, and maybe we'll go this way. Chris?
I'm Chris Quinn, I head up content operation here.
I'm Henry Gomez. I cover politics. I'm not on the editorial board.
I'm Jeremy Pelser. I'm also not an editorial board. I'm a politics reporter.
Jane Cahoon, I'm the politics editor, not on the editorial board.
Carl Turner, I am on the editorial board.
Right, Carl.
And I oversee the editors who have reporters who cover news, sports, and entertainment.
Sharon Broussard, I'm on the board.
Tim Knight, I'm the president of Advance Ohio, the holding company, and I'm on the board as well.
Mark Fosberg, I'm on the board too.
And it goes without saying that those of us on the board are the ones that will be making an endorsement decision, not the news content people who are joining us today. So, anyway, thank you for being here. Sharon Broussard, who is our chief editorial writer, is taking the lead on this endorsement, and she will be guiding the questions, although you can expect us all to jump in at various points.
Yeah,
Great.
and I don't think that we mind that if they talk a bit to themselves as well, right? Okay, brief. I'll start with you, so I'm looking at you, Ted. Could you tell me why you want to be Ohio's next senator?
Yes, because I want to fight for working people in the United States Senate. That's who I came from, that's who I care about, that's who I've spent my political life fighting for. And I believe working people, average citizens, need someone who will fight for them, who will oppose policies that are harmful to their best interests, and will advance policies that will create a more fair, egalitarian society for all of us. And I could go into specific reasons why I'm saying that, but look forward to talking with you more as time goes on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Joe?
I'm running out of necessity. We heard from NASA just a few weeks ago that we're looking at a 9-foot sea level rise if we don't stop putting carbon dioxide into the air. And the Green Party, I believe, is the only party that's capable of actually taking on the fossil fuel industries and getting us off of carbon by the year 2030 in our Green New Deal plan put forward by our presidential candidate, Jill Stein. This has to happen if our society is going to survive. And both the other parties, unfortunately, take money from fossil fuel interests and so are conflicted and unable to do what's necessary. The Greens can do what's necessary. This is a job which must be done, and that's why I'm running, to make sure that it does get done.
We'll go back to that whole issue soon. Rob?
Sharon, first, thank you guys for letting us come in today. It's good to be back. I'm running again because I want to continue to make progress for Ohio families. And as you know, my record over the last 5.5 years has been working with Democrats and Republicans alike, finding common ground, solving problems. I can point to over 45 of my bills that I wrote that have become law. I look at what's happening here in Cleveland and how we've been able to help Cleveland. This morning I was out at a habitat build that I started back in July during the convention, and I was able to see some of the work that the hardest hit funds have been providing. The Cleveland area has gotten over $50 million from a program that I've been the key sponsor of on the Republican side, to take funds from the hardest hit funds and use them to tear down abandoned homes that have become a magnet for crime and drugs. And I saw today in the Buckeye neighborhood where that's happening, also working with Habitat, how to rebuild on those places and to give people more hope and opportunity. I've also worked very hard, as you know, on this dredging issue, and broadly speaking on Lake Erie. And Joe talked about the environment. I'm very proud of our work there, passing 4 bills that directly relate to Lake Erie's health, but specifically getting the Army Corps of Engineers to stop dumping the dredge in the lake. It's unsafe, it's bad for the environment, and good news, day before yesterday as an example, the Corps announced that they are indeed going to go ahead and dredge. Therefore, they won't be shutting down plants along the Cuyahoga River, including potentially ArcelorMittal. And importantly, they're not going to dump it in the lake. They're going to dump it in a CDF on land. I met with the Corps a week and a half ago and implored them to do that. Sheriff Brown and I have worked closely on that together, as we have worked closely on other issues. And I drove in last night. I saw ArcelorMittal going strong, and ArcelorMittal has written a letter that's in your packet talking about the hard work that I've done on their behalf, both in terms of currency manipulation, but also in terms of dealing with this issue they've got right now, which is Chinese exports coming to our country that are either sold at below their cost, they're dumped, or they're subsidized.
We're gonna get back to that, so I'm
Yeah,
gonna ask
and
you.
so again, these are things that I've actually accomplished through my Level Playing Field Act with Sheriff Brown. As they say in their letter, we've been able to actually save jobs. They're bringing back 70 new jobs now, and more before the end of the year. So these are results, and I want the opportunity to continue to work for Ohio on some of the big issues that frankly Washington has not focused on because Washington has been dysfunctional. I'm an exception to that. I sort of go against the grain in working across the aisle and getting things done. But so many of the big issues have not been addressed.
All right, very good. We're gonna get to some of those big issues as we go along. I kind of wanted to start with Joe, and I'll get to everyone.
Oh, thank you.
I think that one of the biggest issues is just kind of the sense that the American economy has stagnated and that the American dream is even further out of reach for people who, I think they would say decades ago, their parents climbed that ladder and now they feel unable to do so. Joe, if you were senator, what would you do about that? And please keep your answer brief.
3 minutes, 2 minutes? How brief is brief?
About a minute and a half.
Minute and a half, all right. Okay, well, in a minute and a half, basically, the Greens have two strategies, and one is to raise the bottom. We want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. This is something that we have been pushing for many years. It was one of Jill Stein's campaign planks in the 2012 election. And then also, my own personal strategy is to institute a progressive taxation system in this country where the wealthiest pay a higher and higher percentage of the tax until literally I want to tax multi-billionaires like Donald Trump out of existence and multi-billionaires like the Koch brothers. We had a 90% tax rate.
Wouldn't that end jobs though, to do so?
It would not. It would create jobs because those revenues into the federal government would then help fund programs like our Green New Deal, which would be used to switch the United States of America to a carbon-free economy, putting up windmills, putting up solar panels, which would both strengthen our economy since we would no longer be sending money overseas for oil or fighting wars overseas for oil. So the short answer is no, that would not cost any jobs. In fact, the billionaires are the ones who are costing us jobs because they are sitting on tens of billions of dollars of assets and just hoarding them, and the rest of us are starving for capital. So first, raise the bottom up to $15 an hour minimum, and then take down the top. Like I said, I'm getting rid of multi-billionaires. I think you could live on $1 billion. You could get to $1 billion, but 10 billion, 15 billion. The fantasy that you can have infinite wealth in a finite ecosystem on a finite planet is a very dangerous fantasy, and it's one of the things that's destroying our country. And so I think we have to add a little reality to our economic system and put in these breaks in the taxation system. So that's my short answer.
Very good. Rob?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's right now very tough for people who work hard, play by the rules, to get ahead because there's a middle-class squeeze out there. And the squeeze is very simple. Wages are flat, even declining on average when you take inflation into account, and yet expenses are up. By the way, the biggest expense is healthcare. And when I'm going around Ohio talking to people, they tell me not only are their premiums up, but they feel like they don't have healthcare even when they do because their deductibles are so high, or their copays. So I think we have to change the way we approach almost every one of our economic systems. Taxes. I mean, our tax reform that we've talked about over the years is absolutely needed. I've worked with Chuck Schumer, who's a Democrat senator that I don't agree with on much, but I certainly agree with him on this, is we got to bring back the money that's overseas. About $2.5 trillion is thought to be stuck overseas, not going to come back unless we reform our tax code. He and I came up with a working group proposal to do just that and to invest that money, not just in American jobs, but specifically in infrastructure. I think we need to reform our entire tax code to give the economy the shot in the arm that it needs. Our code is so broken, so antiquated, it's not working for anybody. Regulations. You know, the over-regulations are one reason that our companies are struggling. And again, ArcelorMittal talks to me about the regulations that they've got to live with. Other companies here in Cleveland, the Juergens company I was at, and they tell me, you know, Rob, if you can just get us to have smart regulations that have to go through a cost-benefit analysis, we can bring back jobs. And the regulatory system has gotten so bad that even the court has stepped in and told the Obama administration, you know, you've gone too far on some of these over-regulations. And then in terms of skills training, in Ohio today, there are about 250,000 people out of work. There are about 150,000 jobs being offered on Ohio Means Jobs. In other words, there are jobs open and yet people out of work. And if you look at it, so many of the jobs that are open require skills that people don't have. And sometimes it's in manufacturing, sometimes it's welding, sometimes it's coding, sometimes it's healthcare. But we're not training people up for those jobs. And this is why I proposed a way to reform also our worker retraining system called the Career Act with Senator Michael Bennett of Colorado. And if we did that, I think we could spend the $15 billion much more wisely. We'd end up seeing the skills gap be closed. And it goes K through 12, which is why I've also focused a lot on CTE, career and technical schools. And Sharon, we talked about education earlier. I think our whole education system needs to be revamped. And we need to start skills training much earlier in middle school. And by the way, Tim Kaine is my co-author of that legislation and the co-founder of the CTE caucus in the United States Senate. You know, he and I have worked a lot on that issue together, and we've made some progress, but we've got a lot more to go. Then finally, trade. We've got to have a level playing field. And my legislation called the Level Playing Field Act actually helps with regard to the steel plants as we talked about, but also it's helped paper workers in Ohio in the last year. Our bill has. It's helped tire workers. If you go to Cooper Tire, they will tell you that, you know, Rob Portman's bill helped save their jobs. And we need to be sure that we do deal with currency manipulation because it does affect trade. Because when you manipulate your currency, your exports are less expensive and they charge our imports more. That's not fair. And I think if we had that level playing field, we had a better tax code, we had a better regulatory system, we had the skills training, you could see this economy really begin to pick up. And there was a recent estimate that the economy is supposed to grow now only at 1.5% instead of about 2.2%. I mean, it's not getting better. I don't care what people say. Yeah, it's better at the top, but it's not better for working families in Ohio. So I think you really need to be aggressive, Sharon, and take on these issues. That's what I've done. Made progress on some of them. On other issues, I have bipartisan proposals to make that happen, and I look forward to working with whoever is president to put those into place.
Okay. Ted?
Well, I'm just sitting here listening, and I'm thinking that Senator Portman has a long-term memory problem. He seems to have forgotten everything he did before I got into this race. He talked about trade, level playing field. He voted for NAFTA, CAFTA, 14 times to give China most favored nation trade status. Now, he has a record with currency manipulation. When he was George Bush's trade representative, it was recommended that the administration take action on China's dumping steel, or we can not use the word dumping perhaps, but selling steel into this country below cost. He recommended against taking action against China. When he was the Bush trade representative, he said taking on China for currency manipulation, and I'm using his words, would be counterproductive. And so we're hearing things out of Senator Portman during this campaign that we haven't heard out of him in years past. He talked about the middle class squeeze. I've been talking about the middle class squeeze for a long time. It's true. You know, people have worked really hard, and wealth has been created. And somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, the gap between productivity and wage growth separated. Productivity continued to go up, wages remained largely flat. That wasn't an accident. It was the result of policies that were pursued. He's voted to cut taxes for wealthy people and increase taxes for working people. That was a part of the Ryan budget that he voted for. It's a part of his record. Talking about education, he has opposed allowing Ohio college students, who some are paying interest rates on college debt of 9, 10, 11%. He has opposed allowing students to refinance their debt at a lower interest rate. Why would you do that? Well, you do that because you're more concerned about what the banks think than what Ohio college students need. So he proposed cutting millions out of Pell Grants. When he was the budget director for George Bush, he actually advocated eliminating the Perkins Loan Program. Now he stands on the Senate floor and he advocates for the Perkins Loan Program. So much of what he says makes sense if you don't view it in terms of the historical context of his performance as a senator. He is someone who has been faced with a lot of choices during his political life. And in my judgment, rather than supporting regular people in terms of tax policy, in terms of education, in terms of trade, in terms of health care, he would like to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act has increased health care coverage for over 800,000 Ohioans. The expansion of Medicare was possible because of the Affordable Care Act.
You mean Medicaid or Medicare?
And I don't know what he's suggesting to replace it. He says he wants to repeal it. That's 800,000 Ohioans who would face losing health care coverage they currently have. Now, that's a little different than the message that he has presented to you this morning.
Okay.
He has done some bipartisan work, and I applaud him for that. But on the big issues, he's been on the wrong side.
Okay. Rob, you seem as though you want to leap in.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many inaccuracies, I don't know where to begin. Maybe I could start with Steve Koff, who wrote a PolitiFact about what Governor Strickland just said regarding trade and said it was absolutely false. This was back in 2010 when my opponent then made some of the same claims. So we haven't heard anything from Ted Strickland about what he wants to do. Isn't that interesting? Not a darn thing about what he wants to do. There's a bunch of false partisan attacks. I know the polls don't look good at this point, Governor, but to just go one after another, false partisan attacks is not.
Tell me what I said that was wrong, Rob.
All of it.
Tell me any of it.
Well, you were factually wrong entirely about currency manipulation. Again, look at the PolitiFact on that.
I have your quote.
Steve Koff, their own reporter, said that was false.
I have your quote.
Well, I don't know what quote you're talking about, but your attack was false. You were false about China dumping. That was not the job of USTR, as you know, and I've made all these points before. You were false about Pell Grants. I've actually supported expanding Pell Grants into high schools, in fact, something I know Sharon is a lot of interest in because it's actually going to help to get kids not just through high school, but into college and to stay in college, to get college credit while they're in high school. You talked about me protecting the banks on student loan. That's not how it works anymore. There's a direct loan program now. You talked about how productivity is going up, but not wages. Productivity is not going up as it should. That's our problem. We need higher productivity.
I was talking over 30 years.
You talked about the Perkins.
I'm sorry, we have some
loan.
of the highest productivity in the world, and our wages are not keeping pace.
Well, our productivity is not good now, Joe. That's one of our big problems.
No, our productivity is incredible. If you look at the figures.
But if you look at our productivity compared to the 1980s or the 1990s
but
or the 2000s,
I just want to point out, gentlemen, that you are actually doing the jobs of the reporters that we have here in the room with us. They're the ones that are supposed to be checking these statements that you're making.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
It's okay.
I'm sure
you're enjoying it.
But I'd like to
address is the Obamacare. I mean, you have said you don't like it.
It's been bad for Ohio.
Okay, but what would you do to replace? There are a lot of people
Chris,
that have insurance.
I cannot believe that Ted Strickland, and you said that this is the most wonderful thing since sliced bread. I mean, he has been way out there on saying how great the Affordable Care Act is. It hasn't worked. I mean, it hasn't worked by anybody's estimation, including Bill Clinton's, who just told us last week that it's crazy the way Obamacare works because it's driving up health care costs for everybody, particularly middle-class families. And by the way, you guys offer health care here. You're not in an Obamacare exchange, but you're paying more for your health care because of the way Obamacare is working, because these companies that are losing money on the exchanges are cost-shifting to you and to all of us who have employer-based coverage. So it has been a 91% increase in the last 4 years in the individual market. Think about that. Nobody can afford that. Double-digit increases again this year.
We need to point out that the Republican administration of the state of Ohio supported it to the extent that they expanded Medicaid, which was made possible by that, and that has benefited the taxpayers of the state by allowing and benefited individual people by allowing, for instance, prison programs to provide ongoing counseling for mental health and substance abuse
Yeah,
issues, which
well,
they could not do
And,
before.
and you can do
May I
that,
just
you can do that
inter-
without the Affordable Care Act. You don't need to turn the
Yeah.
healthcare system on its head in order to expand Medicaid.
May I
And the question
interject?
is-
I'm sorry, I just wanted to hear from Rob for a second.
Sure.
Yeah.
A brief answer, and then we'll go down the line. So Rob, specifically, if you were to repeal Obamacare, you said repeal and replace, what exactly
Yeah.
would you replace?
By the way, I never say repeal without replace, because the healthcare system needs to be fixed. It needed to be fixed long before the Affordable Care Act.
And the replacement is?
Replacement is going to a more market-based system that's consumer-oriented, where you actually let people be able to take a tax credit, a refundable tax credit, if you don't have tax liability, to buy their own health care, to create more competition and more transparency. It's allowing insurance to be sold across state lines. They should have to compete for our business. That will reduce costs. Right now in Ohio, under the Affordable Care Act, in some of our counties, there's only one insurance carrier left on the exchanges. 30% of the counties in America only have one insurance carrier now. That's not competition, and that's one reason costs have gone so sky high. I think you ought to let small businesses come together like larger businesses can to buy health care, which means a change in the law to be able to do that. I think you got to go at the medical liability issue. Billions of dollars, according to the Congressional Budget Office, $50 billion a year in alone just on the federal health care programs are increased because of the frivolous lawsuits. So yes, people should get compensatory damages, but we've got to stop the trial lawyers from increasing the cost of health care so much. All this could have been done, Sharon. I mean, it could have been done instead of turning the healthcare system on its head and creating incredible heartbreak. I mean, there are, as you know, another 40,000 Ohioans are going to be told they can't have their health care coverage this year because 20,000 were in Aetna, 20,000 were in the co-op that went belly up. These co-ops have cost us as taxpayers over $2 billion now.
Okay.
And about half of them have gone bankrupt and the rest are headed that way. So it just hasn't worked. I mean, again, Bill Clinton was right. The model just does not work.
All right.
And so we're seeing huge cost increases, and there are better ways to do it. It's got to be bipartisan. You should definitely not allow insurance companies to tell people with pre-existing conditions that they can't have health care. That should be a requirement. You could do that and not have it be under the Affordable Care Act,
All right,
which has some money.
let's stop
So there are ways to
Yeah.
help
Because there are many
the
people
good
who are
things that are in the
ready to
Affordable
get
Care
in
Act,
here.
Yeah.
All right, we're
but
running
not
out of
have these huge
time.
cost increases and lack of choice. More choice, lower costs.
Okay.
My turn? No.
Sorry.
No, go right ahead.
Joe, briefly, could you comment on Obamacare and where you stand on it?
Yes, Greens oppose Obamacare, not for the reasons that Senator Portman says, not because it's not giving enough profit to private health insurance companies. Greens oppose Obamacare because we want single-payer, government-run, universal health care, the way it's done in every other industrialized country in the world. And it works in all those countries. It works in France, it works in Canada, it works in Italy. I'm Italian. I can tell you that if the Italians can do it, we could do it. And I think that the fundamental problem, the idea that people can make profit off of us getting sick, that fundamental proposal is itself sick. It's a sign of mental illness that these incredibly large corporations exist to make money off of us because human beings have a tendency to get sick. Every study shows that if we went to single-payer universal, our health insurance costs as a nation would go down. Right now, what we've done through Obamacare is we turned the United States of America, the IRS, into collectors, into enforcers for the health insurance companies. Because now we have people having to pay these penalties to the IRS and not getting any health care. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds. Obama called it a uniquely American system, and he's right. It's uniquely American because no other country wants to do it the way we're doing it.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Ted?
Well, you know, I think it's appropriate to point out that Senator Portman has been in the House, he's been in the Bush administration, he's been in the Senate, and why hasn't he come forth with some of these solutions? All I've heard from him is just like rhetoric. And the fact is, the Affordable Care Act, not perfect, but in Ohio it is providing health care coverage to 800,000 people who were not covered with health insurance. That's pretty significant. And so I think we ought to keep it and improve it. And we can improve it. It's not perfect, and I don't know of anyone who claims that it's perfect, but it's a major step forward at least 20 million Americans now have coverage that did not have health care coverage. Now, I guess if you're a person who can get government subsidized health care, like Senator Portman, or if you've got the kind of wealth that you can go out and buy health care, but if you're a mom and dad and you don't have access to health care for yourself and your family, that's pretty serious. That's pretty serious. And so Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, has done some very good things. And I think it can and will be improved as time goes on. But simply to say, you know, we're going to repeal it as they have tried to do multiple times, I think is unconscionable. And I think there needs to be an answer to these folks who now have coverage who would be without coverage. You know, Senator Portman and I have a lot of differences, but I just invite the fact checkers to check the facts. You know, when he voted for NAFTA, he said at the time, NAFTA represents hope, opportunity, and economic growth. He did call himself the quarterback for CAFTA. And he did say,
We want
Yeah.
to move on to some other issues.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
definitely, because we do want to talk about trade, but not about NAFTA. I'm really more interested in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I know.
Can I respond to his continued attacks? He's not telling you
Very-
what he's for, he's just doing his attacks, and
Very.
I don't know how we got from healthcare to trade, but somehow he
We've
did
gone
it.
back and forth. Let's
Yeah.
move on. Go ahead.
Okay.
Finish the rest.
All right, Trans-Pacific Partnership and where you guys stand.
can I answer that first?
Can you answer what, TPP? first?
Yeah,
Yes, only, do not go
Okay.
back to NAFTA, CAFTA, or anything else.
okay.
Okay, please.
So the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a huge new proposed trade deal, an important trade deal. As we all know, last year there was a vote to grant TPP fast track authority. Now, what does fast track authority do? It allows the administration to go negotiate the deal, bring it back, and there can only be an up or down vote. No opportunity to
No amendments,
Yeah,
yes. we
no
understand.
no amendments. Senator Portman voted for fast track authority. Then he admitted to a reporter that he voted without having read it.
That's another
And-
falsehood. Ted,
You will have your chance to respond.
yeah, well, I don't know.
You will.
Okay, I repeat myself. He said he voted for fast track without having read the proposed deal. And now we're in the latter stages of this campaign, and he says he can't vote for the TPP in its current form. He just voted to make it impossible to alter it in any way. I think that's a contradiction. Now, the TPP has a lot of problems associated with it, and I don't think it's a good deal for this country. But I do have a proposal for future trade deals like the TPP. I think the rough draft of that trade deal should be available to the American people for at least 90 days before we have any vote on it, so that there can be public comment and so people can have some input and we can know what's being proposed before we give carte blanche authority to the administration to go out and negotiate the deal. That makes sense to me, and that would be my position. No more trade deals without the American people having access to the agreement before we vote upon it.
Okay, copy that. Rob, in brief, please answer some of the questions you raised about where you stand on TPP now compared to the fact that you voted for fast track.
Yeah, trade is.
And what kind of issues you have with it.
Yeah, trade is incredibly important to Ohio, and we need to expand more exports because that creates not just jobs, but great paying jobs. So trade jobs pay about 18% more on average, better benefits. I mentioned Juergens Manufacturing earlier. They send about 20% of their product overseas, so 20% of the people that work there because of trade. Overall in Ohio, it's about 25% of factory jobs are export-oriented jobs. And yet Ted Strickland, as you just heard from him, refuses to support the ability for an American administration, in this case the Obama administration, that asks for trade promotion authority to be able to knock down barriers to our workers so that you can level the playing field. Because other countries have bigger trade barriers in place than we do, both tariff and non-tariff barriers. And that's why you need to be able to negotiate those trade agreements to be able to knock down those barriers. Our farmers here in Ohio are also dependent on trade. 1 out of every 3 acres is now planted for export. Their prices collapse if we don't have more exports. So the key to trade is balance. I've been a leader on trade enforcement, on cracking down on people who cheat in trade, including China, with regard to their dumping of steel, my entire career. That's been my focus. I did that as U.S. Trade Representative, where I established a prosecutor just for China, where I increased the budget for trade enforcement, where I took China to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, for the first time ever, and won and beat them. It was a case on auto parts, by the way, that was very important to Ohio. And this is why I'm the author not just of the Level the Playing Field Act, which is actually making a difference for Ohio paper workers, tire workers, steel workers, but also what's called the Enforce Act, which says that countries can't circumvent our tariffs we put in place on them by going to another country and selling the product through that country. Right now we're enforcing that. Ohio companies are benefiting. I'm hearing from them directly. They're really happy with this legislation because for the first time ever, I was up at Wheatland Tube in the Youngstown area, Warren, Ohio, last week talking about this. They're really excited because the first time ever they're able to stop countries from going around the trade cases that they have won that I have supported them on.
Yet, Rob,
So-
you do have problems with TPP, right?
Well, I said when I supported the authority for a president to negotiate trade agreements that I was going to look at every trade agreement and see whether it was good for Ohio workers, period. And long before Ted Strickland got in this race, so again, contradicting what he said earlier, I took a position with the Obama administration that I needed to see certain things in the trade Trans-Pacific Partnership in order to support it. Those things were not negotiated. And yes, so as soon as they finished the negotiation, I looked at it and I said, I cannot support this. And I will not support it unless changes are made. Ted Strickland said earlier it's a very important trade deal. Well, I guess it is important in terms of the geopolitical situation, but it's not good for Ohio workers. And that's why I'm opposing it. Now,
All right, I will stop you there.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what in it is not good for Ohio
Yeah.
workers specifically?
well, there are 4 things that I focused on. One is with regard to automobiles for the auto companies here in Ohio, and I'm co-chair of the Auto Caucus. I'm a guy who stood up against currency manipulation, which is the top issue, by the way, for the UAW, United Auto Workers, their number 1 issue, and they've thanked me for that profusely because I'm the one that stood up for them against my own party, against the Obama administration. But in the agreement, Betsy, it says that with regard to country of origin, that you can take more parts in from other countries into a TPP country to come into the United States than you can, for instance, under NAFTA. Sherrod Brown and I wrote a letter to the administration early on and said, if this is what you're negotiating, we can't support this. It's got to be much more reasonable in terms of being able to create a car, in effect, from non-TPP countries in a TPP country. Think of Japan and China. So China could bring parts in.
Maybe rather than going over all the points, you're arguing that these issues are sufficient to outweigh the advantages of
Right,
the deal.
right.
Okay.
And by the way, all 4 of these could be addressed.
But
If we were to be tougher in our negotiations, because the U.S. market is one that a lot of these countries would like more access to. And I do think there are geopolitical advantages to it. Ted Strickland just said it's an important trade deal. That's what the Obama administration insists on. But it wasn't properly negotiated, in my view. And I'm happy to walk through it. The other is currency manipulation. As you know, I told them it needed to be enforceable, have teeth in it,
rather than go over all
and
these
it
issues,
doesn't.
because we just don't have time, I
Yeah.
did want to get, though, to the perception that is prevalent, because I've carried several op-eds from people who have specifically pointed to you with the mood of the electorate being very, in Ohio, being very anti-free trade right now, that you have really changed your rhetoric about trade, that you seem to have,
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. I mean, you look at my record as U.S. Trade Representative, again, I'm the one who increased enforcement, cracked down on trade cheats, put a prosecutor in charge just for China, took China to the World Court for the first time, the WTO, and won. I've always said the sweet spot for Ohio is to crack down on unfair imports and to expand exports. When Ted Strickland was governor, to give you an example of how far out he is on these issues, because he's a total protectionist and hasn't, excuse me, Joe, and hasn't supported any trade agreements ever to expand exports. Exports in Ohio actually went down. This is the time when countries' exports were going up, which they typically do. Ohio's exports actually went down. And this hurt working class families in Ohio because we need more exports. Exports are a good thing. And so, Betsy, I think where we have missed perhaps on the communication with voters is to say, yeah, we need to crack down more on unfair trade. We need to be much tougher in terms of negotiating and actually taking countries to task who cheat in trade. But let's not shoot ourselves in the foot by limiting the exports. Cleveland is a huge exporting area. I mean, we absolutely depend on exports in order for us to have better paying jobs. And the answer to the middle class squeeze is in part skills training, but in part more exports.
Okay,
That's how we grew the
need-
economy in the
we need
1990s.
You know, with all due respect, it seems to me as if, you know, he's just mouthing his platform, and he's not really engaging in a back and forth here. When he was in a position to really make a difference, he was the trade representative. When he was in a position to make a difference with China's manipulating of their currency, he didn't.
Well,
I mean-
to be honest, we don't want to get into exposition
Betsy,
of platforms.
but let me just
He did
But
say
he's
that-
been
clear.
he
he's
did
been
say
making
that-
these claims, which I think
He did
are
say
not
that-
I would
supported.
look at the
He
political
did
fact that
say-
says what Governor Strickland just said was false,
He did
okay?
say-
It's false.
He did say, Governor, that you have never supported free trade deals. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Never.
Thank you. I think it's Mr. DeMare's
Yeah,
turn.
it is, yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yes, the Green Party, we oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership for many reasons, and I hope I'll be given at least 2 or 3 minutes to get through them. Fundamentally, the Trans-Pacific Partnership puts into law the idea that money is the highest pursuit that human beings can have. It puts the pursuit of profits for multinational corporations above any domestic policy or law. It puts it above protecting the environment, puts it above protecting our workers, because it includes, as many of these trade deals have, a process for appeals that multinational corporations can make if our domestic laws threaten their future profits.
That's right.
Which means that if we decide to, let's say, protect an area with a wilderness area that has some valuable minerals under it, a foreign mineral mining company can come along and make an appeal, not to the World Court, not to the Supreme Court, but to an anonymous board of trade lawyers and they can say, look, their wilderness area is affecting our potential future profits. And the trade lawyers will look at it and say, you know, you're right. The United States of America, pay them all the money they would have made if you'd allowed them to mine that wilderness area. And you might think this is kind of an exaggeration, but a case like that has come before the NAFTA court and was decided in favor of the mining company. They went to Canada to do this. These trade deals are fundamentally wrong. Greens believe one of our 10 key principles, we have 10 key principles, they include ecological wisdom, grassroots democracy.
You don't have to list them.
I'll just go for 4. I got 2 in. Just 2 more. We call the 4 the 4 pillars. Ecological wisdom, grassroots democracy, social justice, and nonviolence. And so one of our 10, and outside that 4, is locally based economics. We believe that in the United States of America, we have the ability, we have the resources to supply all the needs of the United States of America. And what all these trade deals have done over the past decades is it's concentrated wealth and power into the hands of global oligarchs, global multimillionaires and multi-billionaires, and it's taken it away from us. Senator Portman talks about the great benefits of trade, and he listed the agricultural. Well, NAFTA is an example of one of the side effects of these agricultural
We're not
deals.
gonna go back to NAFTA.
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
So I'm just gonna have to
NAFTA's
just-
verboten, but
Just wrap it up, please.
all right, so I will wrap it
That
up.
way we can get to more questions.
So the Green Party opposes the Trans-Pacific Partnership on principle. We will not support it, and as a senator, I will do everything in my power to stop it from going through.
All right, thank you very much. I wanted to switch the issue to guns. I guess I'll start with you, Ted, since I'm kind of staring at you there. I know that you've had A ratings from NRA, but you know, in the last couple years or so, you've kind of shifted your positions. You're now you now want some background checks and some other things that you know you didn't before. Could you talk about your shift, and could you talk about where you see yourself landing if you were in the Senate in terms of where you'd stand on these issues? And please, everybody, keep your answers brief.
Well, I've been trying to keep my answers brief. I think not everyone has. But Just let me say that I grew up in an area of this state where hunting is prevalent. I grew up in a hunting family. I grew up where guns were all over our house. You know, it was that kind of country family. I believe in the Second Amendment, certainly want to support the Second Amendment. But my thinking has changed with circumstances. I've got eyes and an ears and a head and a heart, and I can see what's happening in this society of ours. And we lose about 33,000 lives per year to gun violence. About 2/3 of those are the result of suicide. That's about 91 to 92 lives per day is lost to gun violence in this country. And I do think there are some things that we can do that are common sense things that won't solve all the problems, won't keep everyone alive, but will help us make genuine progress toward becoming a safer society. And among those certainly is comprehensive background checks including gun show sales, internet sales, and the like. And I certainly support that. The other thing I support is trying to make sure that guns don't end up in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Domestic abusers, certainly, and people who could or may be terrorists. I mean, as you know, as we all know, there has been debate in the Senate on this issue. Senator Collins, who's a Republican, put forth an effort to prevent people who are on the terror suspect no-fly list, people who are considered so dangerous because of their speech or associations or conduct that they aren't allowed to fly on an airplane, that those folks should not be allowed to go in and buy an assault weapon. I certainly support that. Senator Portman has opposed both the comprehensive background check effort and keeping guns out of the hands of those who are on the suspect terror watch list. And he says, no, I voted for a bill that would do that. Well, there was a bill that all of the interested parties, other than the most adamant pro-gun groups, say is meaningless and unenforceable and would put an incredible burden upon the system to process the kind of timeline, meet the kind of timeline that bill would mandate. So that's why I was here with Gabby Giffords just a few days ago in Cleveland. I've been with her elsewhere. The Gabby Gifford effort is an effort to find common sense solutions. Gabby Gifford was shot, as we all know, as a congresswoman. But she and her husband are trying to find common sense solutions. They're both gun owners, Gabby and her husband. They're not anti-gun, but they're anti-unreasonable efforts on the part of the gun lobby to keep anything from being done that would bring common sense to this situation.
All right, I will stop you there. Rob, obviously you're eager to get in since your name got mentioned and some of your stances on gun control.
Thanks, Sharon. Well, you said that Ted Strickland had an A rating from the NRA. It's not true. He had an A+ rating from the NRA, and you said he changed it in the last few years. That's not true, as you guys have written about. He changed it during this campaign. So he's had a change of heart, as he said. That's fine, but it doesn't give him the right to, again, misstate the facts. And there was a PolitiFact done just in the last few weeks regarding something that he just said, another false accusation saying that I do not believe that people on the no-fly list should be prohibited from getting guns. I do believe that, and I have voted that way. And it was a bipartisan bill. And what it said is, let's be sure people who are on the no-fly list are properly on that list, so there's some kind of due process there. As you know, the famous case of Ted Kennedy having been on the no-fly list. And then, yes, they should be prohibited from getting a gun. And I voted for that. And by the way, it got more votes than any other legislative initiative in the Senate. It was bipartisan. And but for a handful of votes, it would have passed. And I think it would have had a shot at passing the House. My hope is that we can figure out, Ted Strickland just talked about common sense, common ground on this issue. That's one. let's figure that out when Congress goes back into session, maybe even in the lame duck session, figure out how to get that done. So I've been happy to support legislation that makes sense, to actually make a difference. Another thing I've supported is enhancing the background checks, because right now with the background checks, often they don't have the information they need to be able to know, particularly whether somebody has a mental health condition that would prohibit them from getting a gun, because some of the states have not been providing that information. And that's, as you know, one of the weaknesses and one of the loopholes that needs to be closed. I would support actually incentives to the states to provide that information, more funding to be sure the background checks actually work. I support background checks. The way I don't support is legislation that, may sound good, but it's not going to make any difference in terms of addressing gun violence, which is a much deeper problem. The city that comes to mind as having the greatest gun violence in America, of course, is Chicago. And you have tens of thousands of people who have died from gun violence over the last year alone. They have some of the strongest gun laws in the entire country. This is a deeper problem. We have to deal with violence in our society. We have to deal with some of the issues that relate to guns and drugs and gangs, because when I talk to the police officers here in Cleveland, Ohio, what they tell me is that gun violence is mostly connected to gangs and drugs. Gangs and drugs. And this is one reason that I have been, as you know, taking the leadership role for well over 20 years on this drug issue, not just because it ruins people's opportunity in life to achieve their God-given abilities, but also because it does create a lot of crime. And in fact, right now, the #1 cause of crime in Ohio, I will tell you, is drugs.
But you said that you support expanding background checks. Governor Strickland said you do not support universal background checks. You do not, he mentioned he supports closing the gun show loophole. What's your position on universal background checks and the gun show loophole?
Yeah, I'm not sure what universal means, but I do think that with regard to gun shows, that if you're a gun dealer, you should have to go through the same process, background check that you do if you're, at a gun dealership down the street here in Cleveland. And I believe that's, frankly, Betsy, what happens at those gun shows. But let me back up and say,
happens at gun shows.
I think we understand your answer,
Okay.
right, everyone?
Yeah,
Okay,
we
I
should
think
from
you
Joe.
made it very clear. Joe, I'm sorry, I'm sure you want to jump in here.
Yes. Green's, one of our TED key principles is nonviolence. I don't own a gun. I never plan to own a gun. And we reject, there's a dangerous fantasy amongst people who advocate gun rights that somehow owning a rifle, owning a .30-06 is a protection against an oppressive government. That, if all else fails, they can take their shotguns and go save the country. We reject that notion completely because what we need in this country is a nonviolent revolution. We need to change things at the ballot box, not with an ammunition box. So, having said that, we actually on this one issue, it seems we're all fairly similar. I don't want to take all people's guns away, and I would have to say that I differ from some Green Party members on this because some are opposed to gun ownership. But I want universal. Background checks means universal. Everyone who tries to buy a gun has to go through a background check. I support that. I support the assault weapons ban. And the common sense laws that have been proposed over the last few years, some of which have gotten votes, some more than others, but all failed because of the Republicans being in the pocket of the NRA. I would have supported those common sense reforms.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to ask about, now you had said in your opening statement, Senator Portman, that you pride yourself on going against the grain. But it's certainly our impression regarding your on-again, off-again support of the top of your ticket, Donald Trump, that you've been conflicted about going against the grain with Donald Trump at the head of your ticket. I wonder if you could address sort of where you stand right now in terms of that, and whether you think, that you flip-flopped on that as the campaign has proceeded.
Yeah. First, on my comment at the outset, and I mentioned Sherrod Brown, in your editorial when you endorsed me last time, you made the comment that although Portman and Brown seem to be very different and they have different views on a lot of the issues, I bet they could work together for Ohio, and that might surprise people. And that's exactly what's happened. Just to bring you back to that, and that's what I was referring to, is my ability to work with the other side to actually get things done. And I have a long list, including dredging and including the hardest hit funds and including Level the Playing Field Act, where I've worked with Sherrod Brown and other Democrats to try to pursue something that's in the interest of our state and in those cases in the interest of Cleveland. With regard to Donald Trump, as you know, I have been clear about my strong views on the tape that came out a few days ago. I said I found what he said to be offensive and wrong. I said that as a personal decision, a personal matter, I could no longer support him. And Betsy, that's not something I take lightly. I mean, I'm a Republican. I am in effect saying that I do not support the candidate who my Republican Party has nominated. I was careful to say at the beginning of this process that I intend to support the Republican nominee because I do respect the Republican voters. I do respect the fact that, you know, in this case, he won it fair and square. And so, although I have disagreed with a number of things that he has said, and by the way, I have stood up and said that when I disagree with him, as compared to Ted Strickland with regard to Hillary Clinton, when she talked about half of Donald Trump's supporters being deplorable, which is well over 1 million voters here in Ohio. Did Ted Strickland stand up and say that was wrong? She said they were irredeemable. She said they were racist. He did not. On the other hand, I have stood up consistently where I disagreed with him. But to me, this was the last straw. And I made a personal decision. Again, I don't make it lightly. It's a sad situation in my view. Because, you know, he is the Republican nominee. I am a Republican. As I have said numerous times, with regard to my decisions on supporting Donald Trump, I support the Republican positions on growing this economy, as Sharon talked about, dealing with the middle class squeeze, protecting the country better, rebuilding the military. I think our policy proposals are better than Hillary Clinton's proposals, and I certainly don't support Hillary Clinton.
If it was this tape that was the final straw, that wasn't the position you initially took. You initially said, you know, at least he's come out and apologized, so let's kind of move on, and then you changed
No,
your
I didn't
position
say
after
let's
that.
move on. I made my statement the next day.
Yes.
I mean, this is not something I took lightly,
Okay.
Betsy. I mean, I need a little time to kind of think about, you know, what I was doing, which is going against the voters of my own party. And again, I respect those voters. I believe in this case, it's a personal decision on my part, that what he said was so offensive and so demeaning and degrading, specifically to women, that I could no longer support him.
Why was that the last straw? He said a lot of pretty offensive things about a number of different groups, women being one of them, but also Hispanics, Muslims. I'm just curious why.
And Henry,
why after?
as you know, when he said those things, what did I do?
Right, but I'm just
I
curious
spoke out immediately.
why was this particular incident the last straw? How come none of the other incidents was enough for you to withdraw your support?
Well, for all the reasons I've just stated. I mean, you know, he
Because
was.
you respect the Republican voters who support
He was
that
nominated.
candidate?
He was nominated fair and square, and the policy positions, you know, apart from what he is saying, which is, you know, very important to me and, you know, to Ohioans and Ohio families and Ohio workers. I think the proposals to get the economy moving and to deal with our national security threats, which are very real right now, were preferable. That's why this is a very, very difficult decision.
About the,
But-
about the Muslim ban, that's one of his national security proposals. Is
Yeah,
that something
I
you
stood
would-
up. I stood up immediately, as you know, and opposed that. And by the way, that was pretty popular among Republican voters. But it was wrong, and I think it was wrong for a number of reasons. One is that it set a religious test, which I think is wrong, but also I think it's impractical to say, you know, how are you going to stop somebody, you know, they're Muslim or not. I think we should tighten up in terms of our screening, and I agree with that. But Henry, I do believe that for both political parties right now, there's a lot of people who are discouraged about the top of the ticket, a lot of people. And I think that's a sad situation too. I think many of us in both parties don't feel good about, you know, either one of the nominees. And that's where we find ourselves. In my case, I made a personal decision because I do believe that those comments were so offensive and wrong and so demeaning and,
Can I have a word?
and degrading
Henry's ready.
that I decided I can no longer support our nominee. That's, to me, that's a sad situation, but that's where we are.
Well, if Senator Portman is trying to draw an equivalency between Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump, I think that's ludicrous.
No,
I
between you and
mean-
me, between you and me, that you did not stand up when she called over 1 million voters in Ohio deplorable, irredeemable,
And Rob,
racist.
the
What did
next
you
day,
say?
the next day, she clarified herself.
What
and
did you
said-
say when she said that?
She said she
What did you
shouldn't-
say when she said that?
Will you let me finish, please? Will you please let me finish? The next day, she said, I shouldn't have said half. Now, I think the Ku Klux
Shouldn't
Klan.
have said half.
I think the Ku Klux Klan
Is
the
it
poor-
45%?
I think that.
What did you say is the question?
Try to make.
What did you say?
Someone expressing an
Joe.
opinion on a group of people
Yeah.
is fundamentally different from someone saying that they advocate assault on women. One of our 10 key principles is feminism, and your party should not have put that person into the position that he is. He lowered the entire debate. He lowered the entire presidential discourse, and he's done that through the entire campaign. And don't throw that. I mean, we don't like Hillary, but trying to equivocate that statement,
No, it was-
an opinion about people,
It was not,
with
not
a
standing
statement
up, not standing up
that
when a member of your
promotes
party said
assault
something.
on women. I think, Senator, I think.
I get you.
Senator,
I get you.
if I could just respond to the issue that you asked. I was curious for the last year and a half, as Donald Trump said women ought to be punished for having an abortion. We're going to ban the Muslims. He mocked John McCain. He actually stood and mocked a person with a physical disability. How could you support anybody for president who would do something like that? I mean, I could go on and on. He wants to spread nuclear weapons. He says Putin's a great leader. He wants to abandon NATO. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And each time you said, well, I don't agree with that, but I still think you should be the president of the United States of America. What kind of twisted logic would have you think that? This man is unfit. And I do believe that this is a central issue in this campaign because it gets to motivation and it gets to character. It gets to character. Donald Trump was unfit to be the president for a year and a half while you supported him. You said that you would trust him to have access to the nuclear codes. This man who is emotionally, obviously, not stable. And so initially you said, well, he apologized. And then I think you made a political calculation because you saw some 120 or so respected Republicans in the country withdraw their support, and so you withdrew your support. I think that's an act of cowardice, not an act of courage, Senator. You supported this man to be the president for many, many months after the whole country knew that he was not fit to be the president.
Well, Governor, I stood up when he said these things that I found objectionable consistently. You did not stand up when Hillary Clinton called 1 million people in Ohio plus deplorable, irredeemable, racist. You have not stood up in other times. Look, I think
I stood
words-
up against Hillary
I think-
Clinton when she
I think-
voted for the Iraq War.
I think words do matter. I think words do matter. And that's why I stood up, and that's why I've made this extraordinary decision to leave my own party nominee. And words do matter, particularly, and I think Joe has said it right, when you're accountable for your own words. And you are the person who has said during this campaign that you thought that when Antonin Scalia died, that it was a political issue. You actually celebrated his death.
No, I
for
did
political
not.
purposes.
You are
Yes,
not.
did.
No, I did not.
Yes, you did. You also,
Senator, you are accusing me of celebrating the death of Justice Scalia.
Yes, that's what you did.
I did not
For
celebrate
political-
his
it's worse than
death.
that, for political purposes.
No. Can we talk about this? This is important. Because what I said
When you
was,
came here to Cleveland for the convention.
Senator, you interrupted me. Can I
Because
finish?
I was talking and you interrupted me. Let me just finish my list since you went through your list that you read. When you came to Cleveland for the convention, you used a political gimmick of fortune cookies, which offended Asian Americans all over Ohio. You never apologized for that.
I did not do that.
You did too. You
I did not do that.
And you
the Ohio
offended
Democratic Party did that. I did not do that,
Oh,
Senator.
you did it. You handed them out, Ted.
Now let me say something about...
Just last week, you made an offensive comment about rape, somehow equating rape with the way.
No, I can
people
tell
are
you
treated
exactly
by
what I
charter
said last
schools.
week, and
You
you all
used the
can
word
judge.
Let's.
Let me
Can I tell you what I said
finish.
last week about
We
rape?
need to be accountable for our own words.
Okay, I am last week, speaking to the Columbus Metropolitan Club, I said the Ohio taxpayers have been raped by this for-profit charter school movement in Ohio. Now, everyone knows that I was not speaking literally. I said that I could have said robbed or cheated. My guys, for you to imply that I was trying to say something that had a sexual nature to it. Listen, words do matter. And can we talk about Justice Scalia? Because I have apologized profusely for that. It was not something that I should have said, but I didn't celebrate his death. What I was pointing to was there was a decision that involved a labor issue, and it was decided 4-4. And I think everyone understood that if Justice Scalia had been alive, it would have been decided 5-4 against the organized labor issue. And so I said something about it being
His death was
Good
timely.
I'm sorry?
You said you don't wish anyone ill. I don't wish anyone ill, but it happened at a good time, meaning Scalia's death happened at a good time.
Yeah, meaning it happened at a good time in its effect on that decision, not that I wanted him to die. I think everyone
And
there
Senator
understood
Portman, I would just like to point out that you took an oath, you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And that Constitution very clearly spells out the responsibilities of the Senate in the case of a death of a senator.
That's right.
And you, in the Senate,
Supreme Court.
or ever Supreme Court Justice. And the Republicans in the Senate are violating your oath by not replacing Anthony
That's right.
Scalia. And you're doing it for political purposes. You're holding our entire government, the entire United States of America, hostage to your political agendas. And I would not have brought up Judge Scalia if I were you, because you are wrong on this issue. And to toss something off onto Governor Strickland to try to draw attention away from your party's position on this is unacceptable.
Ted, could you, I'm sorry, Rob, could you respond to that in terms of Merrick Garland and why he's
I wasn't-
held up and why that's a good idea, I guess?
I wasn't trying to distract away from that, Joe. I was talking about words matter. And I hope that you did not support what Ted
Actions matter
Strickland
more,
said.
Senator.
I suppose that you did not support what Ted Strickland said, I hope, with regard to Justice Scalia and his death.
I'm not responsible for Ted Strickland's statements. I'm only responsible for my own.
And it was
Rob,
a statement that I profusely apologized for.
Yes, that,
Exactly.
you made that very clear. Rob, let's go back to Merrick Garland. He's still waiting to be heard by the Senate. It looks like that's not gonna happen. Has it been a good idea to just have 8 justices there deciding cases?
Well, 8 justices have been able to do their work because when it is a tie, 4-4, they go along with the lower court decision, so it hasn't stopped the wheels of justice. But it'd be better, certainly, to have a full court, a full complement. And I often find myself quoting Joe Biden when he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, because when I came out with my statement, and then I saw his afterwards, I thought they were remarkably similar, which is that the credibility of the court and the legitimacy of this candidate were going to be compromised during a highly charged partisan year, political year. And I think if we had gone forward, it would have been very partisan, and it wouldn't have helped the court, or frankly him. I met with him, as you know. I've talked to him. And I believe that in the lame duck session, if Hillary Clinton is elected president, that's possible. You could move forward with it. But the position that, if she wanted to, because it's going to be up to the next president, whether it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and that's the position that I've taken, is that this ought to be an issue that the people weigh in on, have an opportunity to decide on in the context of a presidential election. Again, consistent with what not just Joe Biden said when he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, but also Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer when the shoe was on the other foot, when you had a Republican administration, the George Bush administration, and they were Senate leaders. And I do think,
Did
we're
they
close
get a
to the
hearing?
election now.
And a vote?
And we'll have the opportunity to have this be part of people's selection.
All right, we're gonna.
And people are considering it. Both candidates have put out not just ideas of who they might select, but specific names.
But didn't people make their selection when they elected Obama for the 4
Absolutely.
years? I mean, he's the president for these 4 years. That's the selection. So
That's
he
right.
nominated somebody who will not get a hearing.
But Chris, Supreme Court justices stay on the court an average of 25 years. So this is well beyond any one administration. And, you know,
But the
so- and it's-
vacancy came up during the period that he was
Yeah.
elected to serve, so by the Constitution, he nominated someone.
And as Chairman Biden said when he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, it's a presidential year, exactly, a presidential campaign. Let's
But
make
the
it part of
person got a
campaign
hearing
and
and a
allow the
vote.
people to weigh in.
And may I point
Allow
out
the
that,
people to weigh in to be able to determine what direction they want to take.
may I point out
for
that
the
the
next 25 years.
Republicans were not nearly so concerned
also the
about
swing seat.
appearances when Clarence Thomas was the nominee. You were all for getting him in, and he got
I
in.
was in the Senate then. I don't-
No, you weren't in the Senate, but your party, had a lot to do with his.
He
appointment.
wants Donald Trump to refashion the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, he was supporting Donald Trump to be president during this time, and yet he refused to grant this good man a hearing and a vote. I've always said, Senator Portman could vote to confirm or not to confirm. That's his responsibility as a senator. But the Constitution clearly says the Senate has the obligation to provide advice and consent. And I think it was an insult to President Obama that they did not honor this nominee, and I think it was a dereliction of duty. And I believe nearly every newspaper in Ohio, Senator, held you responsible for not doing your job because you were politicizing the court even more. The House is politicized, the Senate is politicized, and now the Supreme Court has become increasingly politicized as a result of your action and the action of Mitch McConnell and the other Republicans.
I wanted to follow up on the earlier discussion regarding your withdrawing your support for Donald Trump. You said that you plan to write in Mike Pence. A lot of people have commented upon that because of his stance on LGBT issues, which contradicts the stance that you have taken. And furthermore, it was pointed out that when you cast your vote in Ohio, it will be a meaningless vote because he is not recognized as a writing candidate in the state, so your vote will not be counted for president if you do that. So I wonder if you could address that.
First of all, Mike Pence was also nominated. The convention here in Cleveland nominated him as well. So I think he has credibility in that sense, and he was part of the process. He's a good man. I know him well. I served with him. He's a Midwesterner. He's a common sense kind of conservative. I don't agree with him on everything, as you have noted. I don't agree with anybody probably on everything. But I think he's a good person. And I thought it was important not only to let constituents of Ohio know that I wasn't supporting Donald Trump, but also the kind of person I would support. And in terms of a write-in, Betsy, you and I can write in whoever we want. We have the right to do that. And I intend to do that. I understand that the Secretary of State has rules regarding write-ins, but I thought it was important to send that signal of support.
There's an issue that I know that you're very keen on, that's heroin, the heroin epidemic. You worked very hard for legislation that got passed, but it seems like there's not enough money in anybody's budget to take care of the treatment needs of people who are suffering with heroin addiction. So to all of you, where does that money come from? How do we as a society get to the point where we can offer the treatment that's needed?
Carl, you're right. It's an epidemic here in Cleveland and all around our state. We're probably top 5 in the country in overdose deaths now, and probably number 1 in fentanyl, which, based on the bust that you guys reported earlier today, part of that was fentanyl, which is this synthetic heroin that is sometimes 50, 100 times stronger than heroin. And 52 deaths in September in Cleveland, record number, over 400 deaths this year. The medical examiner gives us the statistics frequently. Dr. Gilson, because I asked for them because I go on the floor of the Senate and I talk about it and try to get people more energized and involved in this issue. And I spent 3 years putting together this legislation. It builds on previous legislation. As you know, I started my own anti-drug coalition back in Cincinnati 20-some years ago, chaired it for many years. I've been involved with this issue a long time, but I've never seen anything like this. And it does have our state in an epidemic mode. It has a grip on Ohio and our communities like nothing I've ever seen. Part of the answer is more money. Part of the answer is spending the money we have more effectively. And our legislation does both. It provides another $181 million per year over and above what's being spent for opioids. And it also directs that funding toward programs that actually have been proven to work. So it is evidence-based. And the reason we spent 3+ years putting this together is we had 5 conferences in Washington, bringing all the experts in, including a lot of experts from Ohio. I was at a sober living facility here in Cleveland last week, talking to women about what works and what doesn't work. They were really excited about our legislation because it adds to the first time the Congress is providing funding for recovery. So as you know, detox facilities need help, treatment needs help, but the relapse rate without long-term recovery is really discouraging. Whereas if you have longer-term recovery, including sober housing, getting people out of the environment they're in, getting them in an environment where they're getting support, you have a success rate that's far, far higher. And we found that out from the research, best practices around the country. So for the first time ever, Congress, for instance, is funding recovery, including, by the way, recovery high schools, recovery programs in colleges, starting with young people. So I do think it's important for Washington to play a role here. Some of my colleagues initially, when I came up with this legislation, said, why is Washington involved with this? This is a local issue. Well, it is, fortunately, because it's become an epidemic, is now a national issue. And so this will help to have the federal government be a better partner with state and local government and nonprofits. I was at a nonprofit here in Cleveland not long ago dealing with the detox issue, and what they told me is we have so many people who want to be able to find a place to detox that's not a jail or a prison, that we like your legislation because it's going to provide more funding there. So we did have a continuing resolution just passed in Congress just to provide funding from 2 weeks ago until December 9th, just a short-term funding bill. And as you know, those bills typically just have the funding from the previous year. They don't allow any changes in policy, no new starts. And yet I was able to get $37 million into that bill, which is a huge exception, despite the fact that the administration, by the way, refused to offer that as one of their exceptions or anomalies. They had 27 of them, that wasn't one of them. And so we do have more funding in right now.
Is it possible for others to speak?
To be able to get the CARE legislation started, because the implementation of it is going to require a lot of work, because we have a lot of new programs, for pregnant women, for addicted babies, for recovery, as I said, for veterans. We have a lot of new things that are starting in this bill that, in my view, needed funding right away. So we've already started the funding. And then in December, when we get back, we'll have the opportunity to increase the funding even further. And I feel good about it because the appropriations committees have reported out their mark, even though it never came to the floor, and all of them increased funding significantly.
We got to give there's a chance to talk about this too.
Yeah, sure. I thought you wanted to hear it, sorry.
We did.
Yeah, thank you for some time. It is a scourge. It's an epidemic. It's something that I've been aware of for many years. When I was governor, when I was a congressman, I literally followed dirty doctors around southern Ohio, from Lucasville to Chillicothe to Ironton to Jackson. I talked to the FBI. They would set up these shops. They would put a handwritten sign on the wall, all doctors visits, $75 cash, no credit cards, no checks, only cash. It took the FBI about 1.5 years to take them out of business. I started the prescription drug task force because much of this starts with prescription drug usage, and I think we need more education within our physician community, quite frankly, because people get on these drugs legitimately as a prescribed drug, and then they go to heroin because the prescription is no longer there, or it costs too much and heroin's cheaper, and so on and so forth. I mean, this has touched me personally. I just lost about 4 months ago a great nephew to an overdose of Oxycontin. He went to his doctor 3 weeks in a row, got a prescription each week at a higher dosage, and was found in his bed with his phone in his hand. He's gone. So it is a huge problem. And your question was?
The question is about, the senator has a record. He's put together a bill that's put more money into it. Where would you come up with
Well, I was going to talk about resources. Resources. Before the omnibus bill passed in December, Senator Portman sent out 14 press releases taking credit for things that were in the omnibus bill. $300 million for Lake Erie, money for Nassau Glen, money for drug treatment. and he voted against it. He voted against resources for the very issue that he now touts. And he says, well, in fact, I think Steve Croft wrote an article that says this is the kind of behavior that really ticks off the American people. So he's, and then he accused me of politicizing it. And I said, he's been running ads about it, political ads. That's politicizing it. But I've been criticizing him for taking credit for things that he actually opposes. Now, he said, well, the overall bill was too costly. As he's going around the state taking credit for this, this drug issue, I haven't heard him one time say, but I did vote against the funding. I think that's a problem. And so when he had a chance to vote for resources that could really do something to help these local communities, he chose to vote no. And I think that is a problem. I think it's a problem when you take credit for things that you vote against. And he says, well, I got it in the bill, so I need to be able to take credit for it. That's a problem.
So we can ask him about that, but
Yes.
what is your position? What would you
I would have voted
suggest?
for the resources, okay? I believe it is a scourge. I do believe local communities, I talk to coroners that tell me that they need additional help. There are so many bodies that they've got to autopsy and so on. It is a huge problem. And treatment and rehabilitation and recovery services, all of those are important, but local communities are stressed, and they're stressed because they don't have sufficient resources, and they need sufficient resources.
So why did you vote against the omnibus bill when it had all these elements in it that you supported, including?
Well, Governor Strickland's right. I did get the funding in there, and it was pre-funding for CARA, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, my legislation. And I went to the appropriators and I said, we haven't passed the bill yet, but we're going to pass it. And by the way, we ended up passing it with a 92-2 vote, which never happens in the United States Congress. It was not just bipartisan, it was almost a consensus at the end. And I did ask them to pre-fund it, for that fiscal year, which just ended on September 30th. And they did provide some funding for it. And it was specifically for CARA. But it was, less than 1% of a spending bill, less than probably 0.1%, that I could not support because it was a huge monstrosity omnibus appropriation bill. It did break the budget caps. It did have a lot of other legislation in it that I couldn't support. And, it was done in the dark of night. Nobody read it because it's 2,000 pages and a couple $1 trillion. Governor Strickland, when he was in the House, had pretty good judgment because he voted against the same kind of a bill. He voted against the omnibus appropriation bill, probably for the same reasons, that you can't read it. It's shoved down
I
your
didn't
throat
go
at the
around
last
taking
minute.
credit for what was in it.
Well,
That's the
because you
difference
didn't get
between the
stuff
two
in
of
it.
us.
I got a lot of things in that bill, including to help Cleveland and to help on the drug issue, and I was proud
Have
of
you
that.
ever told a single community
But
that
what-
you
what I
voted
wanted-
against the resources?
What I
Senator?
wanted was a separate vote on my bill and the money that I got in there. And I asked, if I could offer an amendment, even to be able to, pull out some of the things I didn't support, and they allowed no amendments. It's up or down vote. If you don't vote for this, government shuts down. And that's not the way to do business. We should do individual appropriations bills. We should be getting our work done. As you know, I'm a former budget person who really believes strongly in actually having appropriations bills in process. We didn't have that and haven't had it for too long.
Okay.
So, but I did support.
I want to make sure that Mr. DeMare has.
Yeah, thank you.
I understand.
And I appreciate that. The heroin epidemic in the United States is a fundamental problem with our society. And a nice little program here and a nice little program there is not going to solve the fundamental problem. There are many things driving people to addictions. One is poverty. Another is despair. Another is medical problems. People are self-medicating, first with legal drugs, then moving on to illegal drugs. Setting up a universal healthcare system where everybody's in and nobody's out, and you can afford your medications, will help break that cycle, that path that leads to heroin addiction. Also, part of what's going on with the heroin addiction are unintended consequences of bad policies. For example, told me not to say NAFTA, but I'm going to say NAFTA.
Briefly.
Briefly. The American farmers have put the Mexican farmers out of business.
Right.
Millions of them came here as immigrants because they were forced off their farms because they can't compete with U.S. agribusiness. A lot of those Mexican farms are now growing poppies. We invaded Afghanistan. We liberated that country. Now, Afghanistan is full of heroin-producing poppies, and the heroin being produced in Afghanistan right now is coming back to the United States to kill us. So we need to fundamentally change the way we relate to other countries and the way we relate to our own citizens and stop creating the environment that fuels addictions. Now, on the short term, we need to switch from a prosecution model completely over to a treatment model. And as I said, the Greens are looking for federal funding to do this on a nationwide basis. And so, you know, it's disingenuous when politicians say, oh, I did this program that helped this 150 people here or this 2,000 people there, when there's millions of people suffering all over the country. We need to fundamentally change the way things are done in Washington, and Greens can do that because we have our 10 key principles, and we will do it, and we've done it in places where we've gotten into power.
Okay. I was gonna ask for a wrap-up.
I'm sorry?
I was gonna ask for a wrap-up.
Yeah.
Okay, starting with you, Ted, and going down the line, why should the voter go into the voter box and mark their name instead of someone else's?
Well, they ought to vote for me because I'm a fella who will stand up for regular working people. Whether it's, you know, the auto rescue, I supported the auto rescue. Senator Portman said it was a lousy deal for Ohio. I oppose bad trade deals that have cost Ohio 300,000 jobs. Senator Portman has supported them. I support the Affordable Care Act because it has provided health care coverage to at least an additional 800,000 Ohioans. Senator Portman opposes that. I believe that we need to invest in our country, in our infrastructure. I'm supporting a huge investment in infrastructure. Hillary Clinton talks about $275 billion. I would increase that significantly. We've got to rebuild this country, our water and sewer systems, roads, bridges, airports, water ports, expand broadband technology, and the like. I want to cut taxes for the middle class. Senator Portman wants to cut taxes for the wealthiest among us. That's been his history. So there are lots of differences between Senator Portman and myself, but if I could just sum it up, I think he has spent his political career looking out for those who are already privileged, and I want to be a senator who fights for regular working people. Thank you.
Well, I'm not a professional politician. In fact, I'm a machinist. I had to take the day off work to come here and participate in this. I'm very grateful to do so. But I am a working Ohioan, and neither of my opponents, Senator Portman was worth about $10 million, and Governor Strickland has been a professional political person for most of his adult life. Neither of them really understand what everyday Ohioans are going through. Neither of them really understand what it means to have to choose between making a doctor visit and getting the car fixed. I do. I'm a machinist. It's time that we send someone from the shop floor to the Senate floor. But I'm also, more importantly, I'm a Green. And so we have 10 key principles that we follow, and we don't take money from corporations or corporate PACs. So when you elect me, you're not just electing me, you're electing a philosophy. You're electing someone who will be ecologically wise, who will be socially just, nonviolent, and will follow the Green Party's 10 key principles. And it's clear from the parties who the candidates, the two ordinary parties are putting up, and the laws that they're passing, that they do not represent the majority of the American people anymore. Typically in elections we have about 30% who vote, 70% who sit out. Typically the Republicans get their 15% who will vote Republican no matter what, and the Democrats, and no matter who, and the Democrats have their 15% who will vote no matter what and no matter who. I want to reach out to the 70% of us who don't vote because you don't feel you have a game. You don't feel you have a part of the system. I'm not a part of the political system. We Greens are operating on a fraction of the money that the Republicans and Democrats are. And we're only getting money from people, not from PACs and corporations. So if you want someone who understands what you're going through and who will stand up for you and not pass laws like the 2005 Bankruptcy Act, which both Republicans and Democrats supported, and which resulted in tens of millions of you losing your homes in the 2008 financial meltdown. If you want someone who will oppose laws like that and support things like forgiving student debt and instituting universal health care, then you need to vote outside the two-party system, because the two parties will never give you those things. They will never fight for your interests in the way that a party based on principle and that put people before profits is going to do. So that's why I'm asking the people of Ohio to make history and finally send a Green to the United States Senate.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Sharon, and Betsy and all of you, thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon, and I thought it was an interesting discussion. I'd like to have heard more about what my opponent, Ted Strickland, is actually for, rather than the attacks, but you know, we at least got some sense of the sharp contrast between us. And again, looking back at your last endorsement editorial, you talked about the fact that Portman has promised to actually work across the aisle and get stuff done. And you mentioned the fact that even he could probably work with Sherrod Brown. And all I can tell you is that's exactly what I have done. I've gotten things done. And I would contrast that to Ted Strickland's record. When he was in the House of Representatives for 12 years, I can't find a single bill he authored or even co-authored that became law. And I can point to over 45 that become law just in the last 5.5 years, and dozens when I was in the House. And they make a difference to Cleveland and make a difference to our state. You did not endorse Ted Strickland last time because you were concerned about his record as governor, having lost 350,000 jobs, having had our unemployment be way higher than the national average, Ohio being 48th in the country in job creation. Those are all true also, because the policy proposals that he was putting forward then, he puts forward now, which is higher taxes, more regulations. It hasn't worked. Bigger government is not going to solve the issues that Sharon talked about in terms of the middle class squeeze and the economy being so weak. But I intend, if I am reelected, to do exactly what I have done, which is to work across the aisle and solve these problems. And you look at how Cleveland has used the hardest hit funds. It's really made a difference in some of the neighborhoods that I was in today, the Buckeye neighborhood and other impoverished neighborhoods in the Cleveland area. I look at what's happening in terms of ArcelorMittal and other companies here who are now getting a little breather because I've taken the lead in passing legislation that allows them to win trade cases and advocated for them on their trade cases to fight back against unfair trade. I look at what's happening with Lake Erie. You know, my legislation on microbeads, to ban microbeads, actually passed and has been signed into law. That'll get these little plastic microbeads out of the lake. And by the way, the body of water that's most affected by that is Lake Erie. The area is the Cleveland area. And it does affect our water quality, and it does affect the fish and other wildlife. I look at what's happened in terms of our legislation on second chance. Cleveland has, in the last 6 years alone, received several grants under my Second Chance Act to help with prisoner reentry to the tune of $2.5 million. That has helped people to be able to, coming out of prison, to be able to get the skills they need to deal with their drug treatment problems, their mental health problems, to be able to get into the workforce and get back to a productive life. I look at what we've done for NASA Glenn. You know, I've taken the lead on that. One of your columnists wrote an interesting column at the end of last year saying it's up to Portman to save NASA Glenn. I'm not quite sure what was up to me, but I was happy to take that responsibility. I was already taking it anyway. And he said, we'll see whether Portman has any clout or not. We not only saved the jobs that were meant to be cut, we added more jobs to NASA Glenn because I worked with them. It was an effort by a Democratic congresswoman or a senator who was leaving, Barbara Mikulski, to put more money into Maryland as sort of a parting gift since she was the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee. We were able to turn that around. I worked closely with Mayor Jackson on a number of issues, including issues related to the Republican National Convention, of course, which was a great boon to Cleveland, following the Cavs win and soon to be a World Series win. Had over 290 visits to Cuyahoga County in the last 6 years. As you know, I've been here a lot. I've been here to see you. I've been working closely, not just on the federal issues, but the local issues, and helping to ensure that in my role as a senator, I do everything I can do to try to create a better life for people in Cleveland and Ohio. And if you re-elect me, that's what I will do. I will continue to work across the aisle and make a difference in the lives of the people I represent.
May I ask my opponents a quick question? Gentlemen, you have scheduled 3 statewide debates. You've chosen not to include the Green Party candidate in those debates. Would you be willing to allow me into at least one of the 3?
I think that's up to the host of the debate. Joe.
No, I've talked to the hosts. They've said it's up to you. I've exchanged many emails and phone calls. I sent you.
I'd be happy to talk to the hosts. They haven't said anything to me about it one way or the other. But
I also sent both of you very nice registered letters that you haven't responded to yet.
All right, well, thank you.
Well,
very
thank
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.